The rain fell steadily over the churchyard of Whitford, a small village wrapped in mist and silence. Amelia stood by the grave, the cold air clinging to her black dress as the vicar read the final prayer. She felt numb, her eyes fixed on the coffin that descended into the earth, carrying with it not just her mother's body but also the weight of unanswered questions. Neighbors murmured their condolences, voices drifting like distant echoes. Amelia barely heard them. She kept remembering her mother's last days, the whispers in the night, the way she clutched an old key in her hand as if protecting something she could not reveal. After the mourners left, Amelia lingered by the grave. Her father had died years before, leaving her mother to raise her alone. Yet something about this funeral felt unfinished, as though her mother had taken a secret with her. That evening, Amelia returned to the old family house at the edge of the village. The rooms were heavy with dust and silence. As she walked up the creaking staircase, she remembered her childhood, the lullabies, the smell of lavender, and the locked door in the attic her mother never allowed her to enter. Now, with the house hers alone, Amelia held the old key she had found in her mother's bedside drawer on the morning of the funeral. Her hand trembled as she reached the attic door. The key turned smoothly in the lock, as though it had been waiting for her. The door opened to reveal a room untouched by time, filled with faded curtains and cobwebs. In the corner stood a wooden trunk, its surface scratched and worn. Amelia knelt beside it, the air thick with dust, and slowly lifted the lid. Inside lay bundles of letters tied with ribbon, yellowed with age. She picked one at random and unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, passionate. At the top, a name, Thomas. The words began softly, almost tenderly, "My dearest Margaret, I cannot endure another day without you." Amelia froze. Margaret was her mother's name. But the date written at the top made her blood run cold. It was the year her mother had already been married to her father. Amelia lit a candle, its flickering glow casting long shadows across the attic. The letters seemed endless, stacked in neat bundles, each tied with the same faded ribbon. She picked another, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. "My beloved Margaret, one day the truth will come to light. Until then, remember that our child will carry both our blood." The words struck her like a blade. She dropped the letter to the floor, her breath catching in her chest. Our child. Could Thomas be speaking of her? The thought clawed at her mind, refusing to let go. She read on, moving from one letter to another. The dates stretched over years, each note more desperate, more insistent. Some spoke of secret meetings by the riverbank, others of promises made under moonlight. And then came the letters that chilled her to the bone. "I see Amelia playing in the garden. She has your smile, but my eyes. Soon she will want to know where she comes from. Do not hide me from her forever." Amelia staggered back, clutching the candle as though it were her only anchor. The air in the attic seemed to close in, heavy and suffocating. Her mind screamed that it was impossible, that her father had been the man who raised her, yet the ink on the page told a different story. She pressed her hand to her mouth, struggling to quiet the rising panic. Who was Thomas? A ghost from her mother's past, a man cast aside, or something more dangerous? And why had her mother hidden his letters so carefully, never speaking his name? At the very bottom of the trunk lay an envelope unlike the rest. Its seal was unbroken, the wax dark red, almost like dried blood. On the front, written in a bold hand, was a single word. For Amelia. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she reached for it. The envelope trembled in her grasp, as if the paper itself carried the weight of decades of silence. She slid her finger beneath the seal. And just as she was about to open it, a floorboard creaked downstairs. Amelia froze. She was certain the house had been locked. The silence stretched long after the floorboard creaked. Amelia's breath quickened, her ears straining to catch any sound. The candle shook in her hand, its flame bending with every tremor. She told herself it might only be the house settling, old groaning as it always had. But deep inside she knew it was something else. Someone was inside with her. Carefully, she placed the envelope back into the trunk and closed the lid. Her heart hammered as she crept towards the attic door. Each step felt unbearably loud in the hush of the house. At the top of the staircase, she paused. The air below seemed colder, heavier. She leaned forward, listening. A faint sound drifted up, a drawer sliding shut. It came from the parlor. Amelia gripped the banister, torn between the urge to flee and the need to know. She descended slowly, her hand brushing the dust from the rail as she went. When she reached the bottom, the candle's glow spilled across the narrow hallway. The parlor door stood ajar. She could see the outline of furniture cloaked in shadows. Gathering her courage, she pushed it open. The room was empty. But on the mantelpiece lay a photograph that had not been there before. It was in a silver frame, polished clean, as though someone had placed it deliberately. Amelia stepped closer, the flame of her candle revealing the image. Her mother stood smiling, younger, her arm linked with a tall man whose face Amelia had never seen before. He was handsome, with piercing eyes that seemed to meet hers through the photograph. Between them, a child barely a year old sat in her mother's lap. Amelia's breath caught. The child's face was unmistakable. It was hers. Her grip loosened, and the candle nearly fell from her hand. The man in the photograph had to be Thomas. But how had the picture appeared in a room she had left untouched? The sound came again, this time, the distinct click of the front door closing. Amelia spun around, rushing into the hall, but the doorway was empty. Whoever had been in the house was gone. And on the floor where the draft blew in, she saw a fresh footprint in the dust. A man's footprint, leading out into the night. The night stretched on without sleep. Amelia sat in the parlor, the photograph on her lap, her candle burned down to a stub. The storm outside rattled the windows, yet all she could hear was the echo of her own heartbeat. The man's eyes in the picture haunted her. By morning, she resolved she could not remain in ignorance. Clutching the photograph and the sealed envelope still unopened in her pocket, she walked to the parish church at the center of Whitford. The vicar, an elderly man with kind but wary eyes, welcomed her in. "I need to see the old registers," she said, her voice trembling. "The records from the year I was born." The vicar hesitated, then led her to a heavy leather-bound book kept in the vestry. Dust puffed up as he opened it upon the desk. Amelia leaned over the faded ink, scanning the names of baptized children. And there it was. Amelia Margaret Whitford. Date of birth, the same she had always known. But in the column for father's name, her hand stilled. The ink was smudged. At first it seemed blurred with age, but the closer she looked, the clearer it became that someone had tried to alter it. Her father's name, Edward Whitford, had been written in darker ink, overwriting faint letters beneath. Letters that began with T. Her chest tightened. She reached out, tracing the page with her fingertip, when the vicar's hand gently stopped her. His expression had changed. "You should not disturb old truths, Amelia," he murmured. "Some secrets were buried for a reason." She lifted her eyes to him, startled. The vicar's gaze held hers for a moment, then he closed the register with a thud that echoed through the vestry. Amelia stepped back, heart pounding. As she turned to leave, she noticed an old notice board on the wall. Tacked among faded announcements was a photograph from decades past, a church fete, villagers gathered smiling. Her breath caught. There was her mother, standing beside the same tall man from the silver frame. The caption beneath named him clearly. Thomas Harrow. But what chilled her most was not his name. It was the faint scribble at the corner of the photograph, almost rubbed away, as though someone had tried to erase it. In hurried ink, it read, "He still comes back." Back in the empty house, Amelia shut every bolt and locked every door, though she knew it could not keep the past out. The photograph of Thomas Harrow burned in her mind, his face staring back at her across decades. She lit a lamp and finally drew the envelope from her pocket. The red wax seal was still intact, but now it seemed darker, almost alive in the lamplight. Her fingers hesitated before breaking it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the ink faded but still legible. Her mother's handwriting curved across the page. "My dearest Amelia, if you are reading this, then I am gone. You were never meant to know, but secrets have a way of finding their way into the light. Thomas is your father. He loved you from afar, but I could not allow him near. There were reasons you must never speak of, for his presence brought danger to us all." Amelia's throat tightened as she read the next lines. "If you see him, do not trust him. He has returned before, and he will return again. He is not the man I once loved. He became something else, something I could not protect you from. Beware, for Thomas carries shadows with him. And those shadows know your name." The lamp flickered as if stirred by a breath of unseen air. Amelia pressed the letter to her chest, her body trembling. A dozen questions stormed her mind. What danger had her mother feared? Why had Thomas been kept away? A sudden knock rattled the front door. Not the wind this time, but sharp, deliberate. 3 knocks. Amelia froze, clutching the letter, her heart pounding. Slowly, she crept to the window and pulled aside the curtain just enough to peer out. On the step stood a man in a long coat, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. The lamplight from the street caught his eyes, cold and unblinking, fixed directly on the window where she hid. Her breath caught. Those eyes were the same as in the photograph. Thomas Harrow had come back. The knocks echoed through the hallway once more, 3 sharp raps that seemed to shake the very bones of the house. Amelia's hand trembled on the curtain. She could still see the figure outside, unmoving, as though he had all the time in the world. Her instincts screamed to stay silent, to wait until he left. But another voice deep inside whispered that he would never leave. That he had come for her, and nothing would drive him away. Summoning what little courage she had left, Amelia crept towards the front door. Her mother's letter was still clenched in her fist, damp with the sweat of her palm. She pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. Then, her name, spoken in a low, steady voice. Amelia. The sound of it sent ice through her veins. The voice was calm, almost gentle, but beneath it throbbed something darker, something that made the hairs on her neck rise. She stepped back, heart hammering, and almost turned to flee when the doorknob rattled. Slowly, it twisted, though she was certain she had locked it. The metal scraped as if forced by a hand that would not be denied. Panic surged. She ran to the back door, but as she reached it, she froze. A shadow stretched long across the kitchen floor, though no one should have been there. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, as if someone had brought the night in with them. Amelia, the voice came again, this time from inside the house. Her candle guttered and went out, plunging her into darkness. She staggered back, clutching the letter to her chest, when she heard the creak of footsteps on the floorboards. They were slow, deliberate, moving towards her. The last thing she saw in the dim glow of the street lamp filtering through the window was the silver frame of the photograph on the mantel, glinting faintly. And then, 2 eyes, shining in the dark, fixed directly on hers. Amelia stumbled backwards, her breath sharp and ragged. The eyes in the darkness did not blink, did not waver. They watched her with a terrible patience. "Who are you?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then the voice came again, smooth as silk yet edged with something that made her stomach twist. "You already know my name." Her fingers tightened around the letter. The words of her mother echoed in her mind. "If you see him, do not trust him." He became something else. Summoning her courage, she forced herself to speak. "Thomas Harrow." The shadow shifted, and the tall figure stepped into the thin wash of moonlight. His face had barely aged from the photograph, handsome still, but his skin seemed too pale, his eyes too sharp. Time had not touched him the way it touched others. "You look like her," he said softly. "Your mother. Margaret was the only light I ever knew. And you carry her fire." Amelia shook her head, trying to keep the terror from consuming her. "Stay away from me." Thomas's lips curved into a faint smile. "You've read her letter. She told you lies to keep us apart. She feared me, yes, but she never told you why. Shall I?" Before she could answer, the lamplight flickered and died, leaving only the pale glow of the moon. The air grew colder, and Amelia swore she heard whispers, dozens of them, faint like voices carried on the wind. They seemed to come from the very walls of the house. What is this?" she gasped. Thomas stepped closer, his eyes gleaming. "These are the shadows she spoke of. They followed me. They always have. And now, they know your name, Amelia." The whispers swelled, overlapping, until they formed something close to words. Her name, repeated again and again, rising in a dreadful chorus. "Amelia. Amelia. Amelia." Her knees weakened, but she clung to the letter like a talisman. And just as Thomas reached out a hand towards her, she heard something else, something stronger. A woman's voice, clear and urgent, cutting through the whispers. "Run." The command struck Amelia like a spark in the dark. That single word, "run," was not spoken by Thomas, nor by the shadows. It was her mother's voice, the same tone she remembered from childhood, urgent and protective. Her breath caught. She stumbled backwards, clutching the letter like armor. "No, this can't be," she whispered. Thomas's hand hovered in the air, his eyes narrowing. "She cannot protect you now, Amelia. She is gone. Only I remain." But the whisper returned, softer now, curling through the air like a breeze. "Trust the letter. Trust me." Amelia's shaking hands unfolded the page once more. Her eyes darted to the bottom where the ink had faded almost into nothing. She had not noticed before, one last line, scrawled hastily as if in great fear. "Burn this letter, and the shadows will leave you. They live through his name, not through yours." Her heart thundered. Thomas stepped closer, his presence pressing upon her like a weight. The voices of the shadows grew louder, a chorus of her name clawing at her sanity. "Give it to me," he demanded, his voice echoing unnaturally. "It belongs to me." Amelia's fear turned sharp, like glass. "No. It belongs to her. And to me." With a cry, she thrust the paper into the flame of the lamp. Fire raced up the page, curling the words in orange light. The shadows howled, their voices shrieking in fury. The walls shook, and the air became heavy with smoke and dust. Thomas roared, his face twisting with rage. He reached for her, but as the last of the letter turned to ash, his form began to flicker, breaking apart like mist under the sun. His eyes burned with hatred, but his voice fractured into nothing. And then, silence. The house lay still once more, the night air cold but calm. Only the faint smell of burnt paper lingered. Amelia fell to her knees, the ashes of the letter drifting from her hand. Tears blurred her vision, but she felt it, her mother's presence, warm and gentle, like an embrace without touch. "You are free now," the voice whispered one last time. When Amelia raised her eyes, the house was empty. The photograph on the mantel had fallen face down, its silver frame cracked. She picked it up, staring at the image of Thomas Harrow. The smile he once wore seemed different now, emptier, lonelier. She set it into the fire and watched until it was gone. For the first time in days, Amelia drew a steady breath. The shadows no longer called her name. But as she turned to the window, she thought she saw movement at the edge of the trees, a tall figure, just beyond the moonlight, watching. And though he did not step forward, Amelia knew. Some shadows never truly die.